The camera flash nearly blinded her. Ariana stood perfectly still, her silk gown catching the light as Choi Minho's arm wrapped around her waist. Firm, practiced, the kind of hold that looked like affection from a distance. She had learned to hold her smile exactly 3 seconds longer than felt natural. Long enough to look real, short enough to survive the night. "Smile, honey," she smiled. The crowd at Busan's most prestigious charity gala moved around them like water around stone. Korea's youngest billionaire and his wife, the power couple that filled magazine covers and sparked dinner table conversations across the country. Everyone wanted a piece of that image. Nobody wanted the truth behind it. The moment the last camera turned away, Minho's arm dropped. He stepped forward without looking back, already absorbed in a conversation with a group of board members who laughed too loudly and watched her too carefully. Ariana followed at a measured distance, nodding when nodded to, smiling when smiled at, and saying nothing that could be used against her later. She had become very good at that. His mother found her near the champagne table, as she always did, as if drawn by instinct. "That dress?" the woman said, tilting her head with the kind of smile that had teeth in it. "Very bold for someone in your position." "Thank you," Ariana said. It wasn't a compliment. Ariana lifted her glass and took a slow sip. "I know." She walked away before the older woman could reload. This was her life. A penthouse in Gangnam, a driver, a wardrobe that cost more than most people's annual salary, and a husband who called her honey in public and looked through her in private. Not with cruelty, but with the specific indifference of a man so buried inside his empire that everything else had become background noise, including her. She had not expected marriage to feel like this. She had not expected to fall in love with him either, and yet, somewhere between his rare, unguarded laugh and the way he looked at the city from their balcony like it owed him something, she had, quietly, completely, and then quietly begun to grieve it, because loving someone who does not see you is its own particular kind of loss. What Minho did not know, what none of them knew, was that at midnight, after the gala, after the heels came off and the apartment went quiet, Ariana would sit at her private desk and take encrypted calls from Zurich, Zanzibar, and London. She would review acquisition reports, approve board decisions, and sign off on deals that moved hundreds of millions across 3 continents. Her company, Nyota Global, had taken her 15 years to build from the ground up. A private investment empire with holdings across East Africa and Western Europe. No press coverage. No public profile. She had chosen invisibility deliberately because she had spent enough of her life being seen for the wrong reasons. She had married Minho as Ariana Ethan, not as the woman behind Nyota, just as herself because she had wanted, just once, to be chosen for something that wasn't her portfolio. That dream was getting harder to hold on to. She was standing near the terrace when she overheard it. 2 board members, voices lowered but not low enough. "How long do you think he keeps her around? Trophy wife. They always have an expiration date. She doesn't even speak Korean properly." She did not turn around. She had learned not to. But later, lying in the dark while Minho worked in his study across the hall, she stared at the ceiling and asked herself the question she had been avoiding for months. "Why are you still here?" She did not have a clean answer. The collapse began without warning, the way the worst things always do. Hanseong Group stock dropped 14% in a single morning session. By the afternoon, a major financial publication had released what it called an investigation, sourced anonymously, accusing Hanseong's board of regulatory violations going back several years. By evening, 2 of Minho's largest institutional investors had quietly requested emergency meetings. Ariana watched him from across the breakfast table the next morning. He was reading reports on 3 screens simultaneously, his jaw tight, his coffee untouched and cold. He had not slept. She could see it in the sharpness around his eyes. Not exhaustion exactly, but the specific tension of a man watching something he built with his hands begin to crack. She wanted to reach across the table. She didn't. "The leak came from inside," he said without looking up. "I know," she said. He looked up then, just for a second. Something moved behind his eyes that she couldn't read. "You should stay out of this," he said. "I always do," she replied. She left the table. What followed over the next 2 weeks was a masterclass in corporate chaos. Corruption allegations multiplied. 2 senior executives resigned overnight. A cousin on the board, one who had always smiled too warmly at Minho while voting against him in closed sessions, began making calls to major shareholders, quietly positioning himself as a more stable alternative to lead the company. Minho was being surrounded, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked like a man who did not know what move to make next. Ariana, meanwhile, had made hers. She had been watching Hanseong's situation for longer than she let on. Quietly, analytically, and when the stock dipped far enough to trigger her threshold, she had instructed her team to begin purchasing shares. Discreetly, in tranches, through a subsidiary that led nowhere near her name. The company buying up Hanseong stock was registered as Queen Holdings. Nobody knew who Queen Holdings was, including Minho. She heard it by accident. She had been walking back from the kitchen when she stopped just outside Minho's study. His voice was low, almost tired, and she had nearly kept walking until she caught the words. "Just get rid of her already. She's a liability." A pause. Then Minho's voice. "She's not going anywhere. She adds nothing to this family. The optics alone." "I said she's not going anywhere." Another pause. Longer this time. "Why?" The voice on the phone pushed. "Why keep holding on to her?" Minho was quiet for a moment. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. "Because she's the only real thing in my life." Ariana stood very still in the hallway. Her chest did something she hadn't prepared for. She turned and walked back to her room without making a sound. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor for a long time. The only real thing. She wanted to let that land softly. She wanted it to be enough. But love does not exist in a vacuum. It exists inside context, history, and consequence. And the next morning, when she opened a file her private investigator had quietly flagged 3 weeks earlier and finally made herself read it all the way through, she understood why she had been putting it off. 22 years ago, the Kong family, Minho's grandfather, specifically, had systematically dismantled a small but growing African investment firm through a series of fabricated legal claims and hostile third-party pressure. The firm had been founded by her grandfather, Elias Ethan, who spent the last decade of his life trying to recover what had been taken from him and never did. She closed the file. She sat in the silence of their beautiful apartment, in the city that had never fully accepted her, married to a man who had just called her the only real thing in his life, whose family had quietly destroyed hers before either of them were old enough to know each other's names. She didn't cry. She thought. The truth was about to change everything, and the question was no longer whether she would act. It was whether, when the moment came, she would choose mercy or justice. The family dinner was Minho's mother's idea. A show of unity, she had called it. A gathering of senior Kong family members and their closest allies, staged carefully in the private dining room of a restaurant that had never once appeared in a public review. The kind of room where decisions got made and quietly buried. Ariana wore ivory. She had considered black, then changed her mind. Ivory was not surrender, it was clarity, and she wanted to see everything clearly tonight. The dinner began the way these things always did, with careful conversation, deliberate kindness, and the specific architecture of civility that everyone in the room understood to be temporary. Minho sat beside her. His cousin, the one making calls to shareholders behind his back, sat at the opposite end of the table with the calm confidence of a man who had already decided he'd won. The food came. The wine was poured. And then Minho's mother, with the unhurried patience of someone who had been waiting all evening for her moment, set down her chopsticks and turned to look at Ariana. "I want to say something," she said, "and I want everyone to hear it clearly." The table stilled. "You have been in this family for 3 years," she continued, her voice warm with the practiced cadence of a woman who had mastered the art of cruelty through composure. "We have given you comfort, position, respect." She paused. "And still, you don't belong here. No matter how expensive your dress is, you will never be one of us." The room was very quiet. Ariana looked at her, not with anger, not with devastation, with the measured stillness of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her chest for years without knowing it. "You're right," Ariana said. "I was never trying to be." She folded her napkin, set it beside her plate, pushed back her chair and stood. "Ariana," Minho began, but she was already walking. She heard his chair scrape behind her, heard his footsteps in the corridor. He caught up to her at the entrance, just as the valet pulled her car to the curb. She kept walking. "Ariana, stop." She stopped. She turned around. She looked at him, really looked at him, and in that moment she saw something she hadn't seen before. Not the billionaire. Not the cold executive. Just a man standing outside in the cold without a coat, looking at her the way people look at things they're about to lose. "Get back inside," she said quietly. "I'm not going back in there. Min-ho, I should have said something. I know that. I should have." She opened the car door. "There are things you don't know about me," she said. "And there are things I've learned about your family that I can't unknow. So before you follow me again, make sure you're prepared for what comes next." She got in. She closed the door. She did not look back. He found the file on Queen Holdings 3 days later. She had not hidden it, not deliberately. She had simply stopped concealing the edges of herself, and in the absence of concealment, the truth had its own gravity. One of his analysts had flagged the shareholder pattern. Min-ho had followed it himself late at night the way he followed everything, with precision and without flinching until he reached the center. Queen Holdings, subsidiary of a Luxembourg-registered firm, controlled by a blind trust. Legal trail that looped twice before landing, unmistakably, on a name. Ariana Ethan. He sat back in his chair. The silence in his office was total. She owned enough shares to determine Hanseong's fate. She had been buying since the collapse began. Quietly, strategically, while he was fighting his board, managing media, and trying to figure out who had turned against him. She had been positioning herself at the center of the entire situation without saying a single word. He tried to call it betrayal. He reached for that word the way you reach for something solid when the floor shifts under you. But the word didn't hold, because he kept coming back to a simpler, harder truth. She had never lied to him about who she was. He had simply never asked. The emergency shareholders meeting was announced on a Monday and scheduled for the end of the week. The kind of timeline that was designed to prevent Min-ho from building a proper defense. A move that had his cousin's fingerprints all over it. Major shareholders were being called privately. Press had been quietly tipped. By the time the meeting opened, it was expected to be over in under an hour. The motion on the table. Removal of Choi Min-ho as CEO of Hanseong Group, effective immediately. He had not been able to reach Ariana. She had answered his calls twice, briefly, professionally, and said only that she was handling some things and would be in touch. He did not know what that meant. He did not know, going into that room, whether she was coming to save him or to finish what the rest of them had started. He sat down at the head of the table. The cameras were live. International financial press had been invited. His cousin sat across from him with the kind of relaxed posture that belongs to men who have already counted their votes. The chairman of the board opened the session. "Before we begin formal proceedings," he said, "I want to confirm that all registered shareholders are accounted for." The doors at the back of the room opened. Everyone turned. Ariana walked in alone. She wore black, not ivory, not color, not compromise. Black, with the kind of quiet authority that doesn't ask the room for anything because it already owns it. She walked the full length of the room without hurrying, without looking at Min-ho, without acknowledging the cameras that swung immediately in her direction. She sat down at the front table. She set a single leather folder on the surface in front of her. She opened it. "My name," she said, her voice clear and unhurried, "is Ariana Ethan. I am the founder and principal of Queen Holdings, registered majority shareholder of Hanseong Group as of this morning's opening bell." The room did not breathe. Min-ho's cousin stood up. "This is... Who authorized this? This is completely..." "Sit down," said the board chairman very quietly. He sat. She had walked into that room holding the power to end an empire. What no one understood yet, not even Min-ho, was that she hadn't come to end anything. She had come to finally make him choose. The room stayed silent long enough for Ariana to feel every set of eyes on her. She did not rush to fill the silence. She had spent years being talked over, dismissed, and erased in rooms like this one. Rooms full of men who had decided before she walked in that she didn't matter. She let them sit in that silence and recalibrate. Then she began. "What you are witnessing today is not a hostile takeover," she said. "It is a reckoning." She opened the folder and placed 3 documents on the table in front of the board chairman. Her team, entering quietly from a side entrance, distributed matching copies to each director. Page 1 covers the internal communications between 4 members of this board and a third-party media firm responsible for the fabricated regulatory allegations published 7 weeks ago. Page 2 details the coordinated share suppression scheme designed to drive Hanseong's valuation below acquisition threshold. Time to coincide with the constructed scandal. Page 3 is the correspondence confirming that the source of the internal leak was the office of the man currently attempting to remove the CEO. Minho's cousin was on his feet. This is fabricated. She's manufacturing. Sit down, said 3 people simultaneously. He sat. 2 of the executives in this room have already been contacted by the Financial Supervisory Service. Ariana continued. I expect that contact to become official within the hour. As if on cue, the doors opened again. Not dramatically, quietly, the way real authority moves. 2 men in plain suits entered. One of the board members, the one on page 1, went pale so fast it was almost clinical. The cameras captured everything. Minho had not moved. He was watching her the way you watch something that reorders your entire understanding of what you thought you knew. Not with shock, he had moved past shock somewhere around page 2. With something slower and more complicated. Something that looked, from the outside, like grief. When the 2 men were escorted out and the room had settled into a stunned and total quiet, Ariana finally looked at him. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she spoke to the room, but the words were for him. You called me honey like it was the size of me, like I was something small enough to manage and pretty enough to present. The woman you smiled at for cameras, the woman your family spent 3 years trying to break, was the one holding the structure of this empire together while everyone else was dismantling it. She paused. I didn't buy these shares to destroy Hanseong. I bought them because the man who built it deserved to keep it. Even when he hadn't earned the right to know I was protecting him. Minho stood up. The room watched him. Every camera in the space found his face. He walked around the long table slowly. His cousin did not look up. The remaining board members watched in the way that powerful people watch things they cannot control, with the careful blankness of people taking notes. He stopped in front of her. She didn't move. He looked at her for a long moment, and then Choi Minho, CEO of Hanseong Group, one of the most powerful men in Korean industry, went down on one knee. Not for show. Not for the cameras. In the specific, irreversible way that people move when they have finally run out of armor. I spent years, he said, protecting an empire, building walls, making sure nothing could touch what I built. His voice was low, controlled, but only just. And while I was doing that, I let the one person who actually loved me stand alone in every room I brought her into. The room held its breath. I am not asking you to forget that. I know what it cost you. I know what my family did, to you, to your grandfather. And I know that I was too blind and too buried to see what was right in front of me. He paused. If you walk away today, Ariana, I deserve it. Every part of it. But if there is even one chance left, choose me. Not the name. Not the company. Just me. She looked down at him. The silence stretched. She reached out her hand. He took it. The Kong family's hold on Hanseong ended quietly, the way overdue things end. Not with explosion, but with the slow release of something that had been held past its time. Several board members resigned in the weeks that followed. The legal proceedings were swift and largely unsexy, the way financial crimes usually are when the documentation is thorough. Minho voluntarily stepped back from the CEO role 4 months later. It surprised everyone except Ariana. You're sure? She had asked him, the morning he told her. I built that company to prove something, he said. I think I'm done proving it. She had looked at him for a long moment. Then she had smiled, not the practice gala smile, but the real one. The one she gave very rarely and only to people who had earned it. What followed was not a retirement and not a retreat. It was a beginning. Together, they launched a joint foundation. A global initiative that funded early-stage entrepreneurs across sub-Saharan Africa and South Korea. Young builders, people with vision and no runway. People who reminded Ariana of her grandfather and Minho of the version of himself that had existed before he learned to be hard. The foundation moved fast and quietly and did not care about press coverage. It was, by any measure, the most meaningful thing either of them had ever built. At a gala, months later, a different city, warmer light, a reporter caught Minho near the entrance. Mr. Choi, she said, microphone forward. There's been a lot of speculation about the future of Hanseong's legacy. Who do you think really holds the power now? Minho smiled. He turned to find Ariana a few feet away, mid-conversation with someone, completely unbothered by the cameras. She glanced over, caught his eye, raised an eyebrow. The queen, he said. She laughed. Not the careful gala laugh. The real one. Full and unguarded, the kind that takes up space without apologizing for it. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ariana Ethan stood in a room full of people who were watching her and felt nothing but free. If the story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. There's more where this came from. Drop a comment and tell us, did she make the right choice?